ever feel like, I don't know, like the things we argue about most, even the people we just completely disagree with, like there's more in common there than we'd want to admit.
Yeah.
That's kind of the territory we're diving into today, actually.
Okay.
We're tackling Kenneth Burke's A Rhetoric of Motives.
Ah, Burke.
And Dr. Bobby is here to help us unpack all of this. And trust me, this is some heady stuff.
Yeah.
Get ready to see how, like, persuasion, identity, even our favorite fictional characters, they're all connected in ways you might not expect.
Yeah, for me, what makes Burke so fascinating is that he gets us to move beyond this idea of rhetoric just being about speeches or debates. He's really interested in the why behind all communication, all action, really. What drives us to connect or to clash or even just to become who we are.
And that's what he calls the rhetoric of motives, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But he also argues that even in opposition, like even when we disagree, there's this underlying identification. How does that work? It seems like, to disagree, you'd have to at least agree to disagree, which kind of suggests there's got to be some common ground there in the first place.
Yeah. No, you've hit on it. This is key to Burke. So Burke says that even when we disagree, there's this shared space, right? This connection that makes that disagreement even possible. Like imagine a Venn diagram.
Okay, yeah.
Those overlapping circles, it's in that overlap, that shared understanding where we can at least start to grasp each other's motives, even if we don't agree with, the conclusions they might draw.
So it's like to have an argument about which pizza topping is best, you first have to agree that pizza is the best dinner. Yeah. Like there's that baseline you both get.
Exactly. Yeah. And this isn't just like academic debates we're talking about here.
Right.
This is relationships, it's politics, it's even those internal tug of wars we have with ourselves, this identification within division, it's everywhere.
So how does this identification actually happen? Like what bridges that divide?
So Burke uses this term mediation for this kind of bridge building. So for opposing sides to find that common ground, there needs to be a mediator, something that allows for that understanding to flow back and forth.
So like a neutral referee in like a wrestling match.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or imagine some shared value that kind of overrides the actual disagreement. So Burke uses this great example from Star Trek, the Vulcans and the Romulans, right? They're often at odds, obviously, but they have this shared value of logic and order. And that's their mediator. That's their basis for communication, even when they want to,
phaser each other out of existence.
Exactly.
Laughing.
Yeah, exactly.
So finding that common ground, that point where you identify with the other side, that's key to resolving conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
But what about when things get a little morally gray? Like why are we so drawn to characters who are, well, kind of messed up?
Ooh. You're leading us to one of Burke's most insightful points. He says authors tap into our own warped motives when they create these compelling characters.
Warped motives, I like that.
Yeah.
So these are characters who might do like pretty questionable things, but we still root for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Why do we do that?
Exactly. Burke argues even if we don't condone those actions, understanding their why, that's what creates the identification, even empathy. We see ourselves, however flawed, we see ourselves in their struggle.
It's like that saying, everyone is the hero of their own story.
Oh, yeah, totally.
We might not agree with, like, the villain's methods, but if we understand their motives, we can at least see why they feel justified.
And that's what makes characters like anti-heroes so fascinating.
Yeah.
Think about Walter White in Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah.
Right? These figures, they challenge our simple ideas of good versus evil. They force us to confront the messiness of human motivation.
Speaking of complex characters, you mentioned that Burke actually uses Batman as an example.
Yeah.
What makes him so interesting through this lens?
So Batman, he embodies Burke's idea of what's called internalized rhetoric. So he might seem like this lone wolf, but his actions are driven by this deep need to communicate.
Okay.
He wants to strike fear into criminals. He wants to inspire hope in the citizens of Gotham.
Right. But it's not just about the character's inner world,
Yeah.
right? It's also about how we connect as the audience.
Right.
Think about how many actors have played Batman.
Oh, yeah.
Each one brings this new interpretation that changes how we see the character.
You're right. And Burke calls this the parliamentary wrangle within an individual.
Parliamentary wrangle.
Yeah. So we're constantly negotiating all these different versions of ourselves. It's just like each new Batman reflects a different facet of the character.
So we've got all these different voices inside us, these different parts of our personality, all kind of pushing and pulling to define who we are.
Precisely. Yeah. And those voices are shaped by everything, right? Our experiences, our relationships, even just the roles we play out in society.
Like how each new Batman film kind of reflects the anxieties and the hopes of its time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these internal parliamentary wrangles going on, these different versions of ourselves. We're constantly sorting through, but Burke takes it even further, right? He says we can be our own audience.
Exactly. He suggests we engage in what he calls internal rhetoric.
Okay.
We use language, we use imagery to persuade ourselves, to shape our own thoughts and actions.
So it's like we're giving ourselves like a pep talk before a big presentation,
Yeah.
or maybe we're trying to justify like a splurge purchase to our inner accountant.
Exactly. Yeah, Burke points out that even in our most private thoughts, we're still using rhetoric. Think about the last time you made a tough decision. You probably weighed the pros and cons, maybe even pictured different outcomes. That's internal rhetoric. We're using language and imagery to persuade ourselves to make sense of our choices.
And to illustrate this idea of like the different voices within us, Burke uses the example of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? This idea of the double and how we can feel so torn between these different sides of ourselves.
Yes, Jekyll and Hyde represent that classic struggle between our best and worst impulses. It's a powerful metaphor for the internal conflicts we all face. We all have that inner critic, right? That voice of doubt or fear. And then there's that other voice urging us to take risks to embrace new possibilities.
And this idea of the double isn't just limited to like literature, right? I mean, psychologists talk about similar concepts like cognitive dissonance, where we hold conflicting beliefs, or even the idea of multiple selves.
Absolutely. Burke's work connects to so many fields, psychology, sociology, even neuroscience.
Wow.
His insights into human motivation and communication are incredibly relevant.
So how does all of this play out in a more, let's say, superpowered context? You mentioned the Hulk as a prime example of Burke's ideas in action.
The Hulk is fascinating because he embodies this struggle between opposing forces in such a raw, visceral way. He's a walking, smashing example of the parliamentary wrangle and the internal audience.
That's like Bruce Banner is in a constant negotiation with this other part of himself, this rage monster that represents all his repressed anger and trauma.
And what's interesting is how each iteration of the Hulk, Gray Hulk, Savage Hulk, Professor Hulk, represents a different stage in Banner's journey towards self-acceptance. He's trying to integrate these different parts of himself to find a way to live with the rage without being consumed by it.
So it's not just about defeating the villain in the big battle at the end. It's about defeating the villain within.
Exactly. And that's a theme that resonates throughout mythology and storytelling. The hero's journey is often about confronting and coming to terms with our own shadow selves.
Oh, and you can even see this playing out in real life, right? Think about someone who's been through a traumatic experience. They might have that initial instinct to suppress those feelings, to push them down and pretend they don't exist.
Well, those feelings don't just disappear, do they? They might manifest in unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
Anger addiction, self-sabotage. The real journey, the hero's journey, is about acknowledging those feelings, integrating them into our sense of self.
So instead of trying to silence those darker impulses, maybe it's about having a more compassionate and understanding internal dialogue.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that those impulses are part of what makes us human. It's in the integration, not the suppression, that we find wholeness.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about identification, division, internal rhetoric, and even the Hulk's inner demons. What's the key takeaway, the big aha moment that you hope our listener will walk away with?
I think Burke's most powerful message is that despite all the conflict and division we experience, both internally and externally, there's an underlying need for connection and identification. We're social creatures, hardwired to seek out those points of common ground, even with those we might perceive as different or even opposed to us. And that starts by understanding the motives behind the actions, both our own and those of others.
It's like that saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And Burke kind of gives us the tools to actually do that, to like go beyond just hearing someone's words and really try to grasp the why behind them.
Yeah, and that's where rhetoric becomes so crucial. Not as this way to like manipulate or to win an argument, but as this bridge to understanding those motives, to finding those points of connection.
So it's less about winning the argument and more about like really listening, trying to see the world through the other person's eyes.
Exactly.
It's about finding those surprising areas of agreement, maybe, that can lead to a more productive conversation.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is that Burke believes this applies not just to our interactions with with other people, but also to how we understand ourselves. Remember that parliamentary wrangle within
Yeah.
those different voices? They represent different motives, all vying for attention.
So instead of trying to, like, I don't know, silence those different parts of ourselves,
Yeah.
maybe it's about acknowledging them, like listening to what they have to say.
Right.
And maybe our inner Hulk is trying to tell us something important,
Yeah.
even if it comes out like as anger or frustration.
That's a powerful insight. Burke's work encourages us to approach, our inner world with that same curiosity and compassion we try to extend to others. It's about recognizing that those warped motives, those seemingly irrational impulses, that's part of what makes us human. And they often hold, they hold valuable clues about our deepest needs and desires.
This has been incredible, Dr. Bobby. Burke's ideas are so complex, so nuanced. It's like they make you rethink everything. How we communicate, how we see ourselves, even how we understand those classic like hero-villain narratives.
He definitely challenges us to think differently.
He really does.
Yeah.
As we wrap up here, is there one thing you hope our listener takes away from Burke and can actually apply to their own life? Like what's a one golden nugget?
I think it's cultivate curiosity. Be curious about yourself, about other people, about the motives driving our actions, our interactions. I think when we approach the world with that kind of curiosity and a willingness to understand, we open ourselves up to new connections, new possibilities for growth and transformation.
Beautifully said. And maybe, just maybe, we can even learn to embrace our own inner parliamentary wrangles a little bit more.
Yeah.
Find a little more harmony in all that internal debate. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kenneth Burke's A Rhetoric of Motives. Until next time, keep exploring those fascinating whys that make us human.